Hi, 5th graders. Welcome to Lesson 3.1, Thousandths. The essential question for this lesson is, how can you describe the relationship between two decimal place value positions? Now, let's go ahead and open up your Go Math workbooks to Lesson 3.1, found on page 53, and let's get started. Now, before we get started solving problems in this lesson, I want to talk to you guys about a new place value that we're going to encounter. That new place value is called the thousandths. And what it says are, thousandths are smaller parts than hundredths. If 1/100th is divided into 10 equal parts, each part is 1,000th. Now, let's take a look at question number 1. As you can see, question number 1 has already been completed for us, but it's a good model that leads us into our lesson on the thousandths. So for question 1, what I want you to notice first is this. We have a model of 1 whole, and that model of 1 whole has been divided into 10 equal parts. And what I want you to understand is 1/10 is one of those parts. So we're going to start out first of all by counting the number of tenths that we have. So what I know is that I have 1, 2 tenths that are fully shaded. So that represents 2/10. Now, when 1/10 is divided into 10 equal parts, that represents 1/100th. So what I know is, I know that I have 3 hundredths that are shaded. So now I have my 3 hundredths. Now, when one of those little hundred squares is divided into 10 equal parts, that becomes 1,000. So what you see over here models that 1,000. It's that 100th square broken up into 10 equal parts, and that now represents our thousandths. So I'm going to make my count to see how many thousandths I have, and what I notice is that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thousandths shaded in. So there are my 6 thousandths. So what you see written out is this. I have my 2 in the tenths place, I have my 3 in the hundredths place, and then I have my 6 in the thousandths place. And that decimal number is read as 236 thousandths. Now, let's take a look at question number 2. Question number 2 says to write the decimal shown by the shaded parts of each model. Now, when you look at question number 2, I want to point out that you have 1 whole represented here. And that 1 whole has been divided into 10 equal parts, and 1/10 is one of those parts. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make a count of the tenths that are shaded in. So I'm going to begin to make my count, and what I notice is this. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tenths that are fully shaded in. So I'm going to go ahead and write down that I have 9 tenths. So right down here I'm going to write down 9 tenths. Now, what I also want to point out is this. When 1/10 is divided into 10 equal parts, 1/100th is one of those parts. So I'm now going to make a count of my hundredths. So what I see is I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of my hundredths that are shaded in. So I'm going to make a note down here that I know that I have 7 hundredths. Now, my last step is going to be this. What I know is when one of my hundredths is divided into 10 equal parts, 1,000th becomes one of those parts. So once again, this box over here represents that thousandths. So I'm going to now make a count and see how many thousandths I have shaded in. And what I see is that I have 1,000th. So I'm going to make a note that I have 1,000th. Now, I'm going to put this all together and I'm going to write this as a decimal, which is what the directions tell me to do. So if I have 9/10ths, 700ths, and 1,000ths, what I need to do is this. I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to put my 9 in the tenths place. I'm going to put my 7 in the hundredths place, and I'm going to put my 1 in the thousandths place. Now, I did not have any whole numbers, so I'm going to put a 0 in front of the decimal, so that becomes a 0. So I have 971 thousandths, and that is my decimal shown by the shaded parts of the model. Now, let's take a look at question number 3. The directions say to complete the sentence, and question 3 says, 4/10ths is 10 times as much as blank. Now, the important phrase in this sentence is the phrase 10 times as much as. And I want to talk to you about that phrase because what I need you to understand is this. Each place value is 10 times as much as the place value to its right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to rewrite my 4/10ths. And what I know is I'm looking for the number that would be one place value to its right. So that means I'm actually writing a number that's less than 4/10ths. Well, what I know is if I'm going to write that number that's one place value to the right of 4/10ths, using my knowledge of place value and place value patterns, I know that that place to the right of 4/10ths is going to be 400ths. Now, I also want to point something else out to you. I want to point out to you the difference in the number of zeros now between the digit and the decimal point. What happens is the number of zeros between the digit, which in this case is our 4, that's our digit, the number of places, the number of zeros between the digit and the decimal point increases for each place value you move to the right. So in the first part of our problem with 4/10ths, there's no 0 between the 4 and the decimal point. But when I moved one place to the right, I now have 1 0 in between the 4 and the decimal point. So the number of zeros has increased. So what I know is I can complete my sentence as this. 4/10ths is 10 times as much as 400ths. Now, let's take a look at question number 4. Question 4's directions say complete the sentence, and when I look at number 4, what it says to me is this. It says 3/1000ths is 1/10 of blank. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about that 3/1000ths, and let's just make our count to understand why it would be 3/1000ths. Well, what I know is that first place right behind the decimal is our tenths. So we have our tenths, then our hundredths, and then our thousandths. And that 3 is in the thousandths place, making that decimal number 3/1000ths. So once again, the question is 3/1000ths is 1/10 of blank. Well, what I know is this. The important phrase here is that phrase 1/10 of. Now, when I see the phrase 1/10 of, what I know is this. Each place value is 1/10 of the place value to its left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to rewrite our decimal. So I have, once again, 3/1000ths. But this time, because it uses the phrase 1/10 of, I'm looking for the number to its left, which means I'm actually looking for a number that is greater than 3/1000ths. Well, once again, using my knowledge of place value, if I'm going to write that number that's one place value to the left of 3/1000ths, that's going to become 300ths. Now, I want to point something else out to you. I want to point out to you the difference or the change in the number of zeros between the digit, which in this case is our 3, and the decimal point. And what I know is this. The number of zeros between the digit and the decimal point decreases for each place value that you move to the left. So when I start out with the number that was given, which was 3/1000ths, I see that there's 2 zeros in between my 3 and my decimal. When I move one place to the left, I notice that there's now just 1 0 in between my 3 and my decimal point. So to complete this sentence, what I'm going to be able to say is this. 3/1000ths is 1/10 of 300ths. And I'm going to complete that by writing 300ths as my answer. Now, let's take a look at the table that's given. The directions say to use place value patterns to complete the table. So I want to talk to you first of all about the phrases, the important phrases that are given in order to help us complete this table. The first phrase is our phrase 10 times as much as. And what I want to point out to you is this. When you're finding a number that's 10 times as much as the number given, you can move your decimal one place to the right. So I'm going to write an R here to represent moving to the right. Now, we also have the phrase 1/10 of. And when I see the phrase 1/10 of, what I can do is this. I know that I can move my decimal one place to the left, and that will give me a number that's 1/10 of the number given. So let's try this. We're going to start out with question number 5, and for question 5, they give us the decimal 1/10. So I'm going to rewrite the decimal 1/10, and if I'm going to find a number that's, first of all, 10 times as much as 1/10, I'm going to move my decimal one place to the right. Well, when I do that, my decimal now falls behind my 1, so what happens is that turns out to be the whole number 1. So the number that's 10 times as much as 1/10 is 1. Now, let's turn our attention to the 1/10 of column, and what I know is this. I now have to find the number that is 1/10 of 1/10. So I'm going to once again rewrite my decimal that's given, and in this problem, it is the decimal 1/10. Well, what I know is this. If I'm going to find 1/10 of 1/10, I need to move my decimal one place to the left. So I'm going to take that decimal point and I'm now going to move it one place to the left. Well, that means my decimal now falls in front of the 0. So what I now have is an answer of 1/100th. So I know that the number that is 1/10 of 1/10 is 1/100th. Now, let's try this again. Let's take a look at question number 6, and in this case they give us the number 900th. Well, first of all, I have to find a number that's 10 times as much as my 900ths. So once again, I'm going to rewrite the number that's given. So I'm going to write down my 900ths, and remember, if we're finding a number that's 10 times as much as, we're going to move the decimal one place to the right. So I'm going to take that decimal point and I'm going to move it one place to the right so that it now falls in front of the 9. So what that becomes is it becomes 9/10ths. So the number that's 10 times as much as 900ths is 9/10ths. Now let's turn our attention to the next column. Once again, this is our 1/10 of column. So I now have to find the number that's 1/10 of 900ths. So I'm going to once again rewrite my number, and the number that's given was 900ths. And if I'm going to find 1/10 of, once again I've got to move one place to the left. So I'm going to take that decimal point and I'm going to move it one place to the left. So the decimal now falls in front of that first 0. So what I end up with is, I end up with an answer of 9/1000ths. So the number that is 1/10 of 900ths turns out to be 9/1000ths. Now let's try this again. I want to look at question 7, and for question 7 they give us 400ths. Now my first job is to find the number that's 10 times as much as 400ths. So I'm going to once again start out by writing the number that's given down. So I have my 400ths, and remember, if it's 10 times as much as, we're going to move it one place to the right. So I'm going to take that decimal and I'm going to move one place to the right, and when I do that, it now falls in front of the 4. So what I know is, I know now that 4/10ths is 10 times as much as my 400ths. Now I also have to find the number that's 1/10 of my 400ths. So once again, I'm going to write that 400ths down. So here is my 400ths. And remember, when it comes to 1/10 of, we're going to move the decimal one place to the left. So I'm now going to take my decimal point and move it one place to the left. So it now falls in front of that first zero. So what I know is the number that is 1/10 of 400ths is going to turn out to be 4 thousandths. Now, I would like you to try question number 8. So pause the video and I want to see if you can find the number that is 10 times as much as 6/10, as well as the number that is 1/10 of 6/10. Now, if you came up with an answer of 6 for the number that is 10 times as much as 6/10, you are correct. And if you came up with 600ths as the number that is 1/10 of 6/10, you were also correct. Now I want to talk to you about some of the patterns that I see here. As I look at my 10 times as much column, what I notice is this. I notice that there is a decrease in the number of zeros between my digit and my decimal point. So for instance, if I look at question number 6, I see that when I have 900ths, there's 1 0 in between the 9 and the decimal point. Well, when I find the number that's 10 times as much as, I now see that there is no 0 between the 9 and the decimal point. Now, on the flip side, when I look at my 1/10 of column, I see that there is an increase of zeros. So let's look back at the 900ths again. In the number 900, there's once again 1 0 between the 9 and the decimal. Well, when I look at the 1/10 of column, I now see that there's 2 zeros in between the 9 and the decimal. So that is a pattern that we should be aware of when we're talking about the 10 times as much as and the 1/10 of. Now, let's take a look at question number 13. It's one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and number 13 says, the diameter of a dime is 705 thousandths of an inch. Complete the table by recording the diameter of a dime. Well, as I read through that problem, what I notice is this. I know that they give me the diameter of a dime, but it's written in word form, so I have 705 thousandths, and I have to write it in my decimal form. Now, down below, you see that I've written down a little place value chart for us, and I want to review what each one of those place values, what they represent. So in front of the decimal point, I have my ones, then my decimal, and right behind the decimal, I have the tenths, I have the hundredths, and I have the thousandths place. Well, what I know is this. They give me 705 thousandths. So what I'm going to do is, I know that I do not have any whole number part to this decimal, so I'm going to go ahead and write a 0 in the whole number part. But what I do have is this. I know that I have 705 thousandths. So what I know is when I write this number correctly, my 5 should be in the thousandths place. So let's double check. I have my tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So I know that my 5 has ended up in the thousandths place, so I know that this decimal number represents 705 thousandths. So I'm going to go up to my table, and I'm going to go ahead and write in the decimal number that we came up with, which represents 705 thousandths. Now, let's take a look at question number 14. This is another one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and number 14 says, what is the value of the 5 in the diameter of a $50? So as I read through that problem, I know that they're asking me for the value of the 5 in the diameter of the $50. So I'm going to come up here and I know that I have to focus on the $50. So I now have to think about my place value knowledge. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to begin to make my count. Behind the decimal, I know that that first place value is the tenths, then I have the hundredths, and then I have the thousandths. So what I see is, I see that my 5 is in the thousandths place. So I know that the value of my 5 is going to be 5 thousandths. Now, I could also write that and represent that as showing my 5 in the thousandths place, which is also 5 thousandths. And what I now have is I have the value of the 5 in the diameter of the half dollar. Now, let's take a look at question number 15. It's one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and number 15 says, which coins have a diameter with a 5 in the hundredths place? So as I read through that question, what I notice is this. We're looking for the coins that have a 5 in the hundredths place. So let's review our place value once again down here with the place value chart that I've drawn. I know that in front of the decimal, that number is the ones. Then behind the decimal, I have the tenths, the hundredths, and the thousandths. So what I know is I'm looking for the numbers that have a 5 sitting in the hundredths place. So let's start out by looking at our penny. When I look over here at the decimal, what I notice is that 5 is sitting in the hundredths place. The 7 is in the tenths, 5 is the hundredths, and 0 is the thousandths. So I know that I can write down penny as one of the coins that has a 5 in the hundredths place. Now let's take a look at the nickel. When I look at the decimal number, the diameter in inches, I see that my 8 is in the tenths, my 3 is in the hundredths, and the 5 is in the thousandths. So nickel is not one of the coins that we would want to write down. Now let's look at our dime. When I look at the dime, I see a 7 in the tenths place, a 0 in the hundredths place, and a 5 in the thousandths place. Well, I know that a dime is also not one of the coins that has a 5 in the hundredths place. Now let's look at our quarter. For our quarter, we have a 9 in the tenths place, we have a 5 in the hundredths, and a 5 also in the thousandths. So I know that I can add quarter to my list because my quarter also has a 5 in the hundredths place. Now, the last coin is the half dollar. With the half dollar, I have a 1 in the ones place, 2 in the tenths place, the 0 is in the hundredths place, and the 5 is in the thousandths place. So the half dollar does not have a 5 in the hundredths place. So my complete answer is a penny and a quarter. Both are coins that have a diameter with a 5 in the hundredths place. And to review again, decimal place value, I have my tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. Now, let's take a look at our homework questions for tonight. I would like you guys to complete question number 1 and question number 2, as well as numbers 3 through 6. These questions can be found on page 54 in your Go Math workbook. Don't forget, somewhere on your homework page I want you to let me know, do you feel like you're number 1 a novice, number 2 an apprentice, number 3 a practitioner, or number 4 an expert? Don't forget, your homework questions for tonight will be to complete number 1 and number 2, along with numbers 3 through 6, found in your Go Math workbook on page 54. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you at school tomorrow.